Well, the legacy news media are on the warpath. They're angry because of opposition from both parents, teachers and principals. The 2020 RSE, Relationships and Sexuality Education curriculum, is being revised. But is the earlier version any better? We say definitely not. So as you'll remember, in the coalition agreement between National and New Zealand First after the election at the end of 2023, it said this: refocus the curriculum on academic achievement and not ideology, including the removal and replacement of the gender, sexuality and relationship-based education guidelines. Well, that had all the media, academics and the teacher unions in a tiz. They were panicking. Fancy expecting schools to focus on reading, writing and arithmetic, and not be allowed to indoctrinate our kids with the ideology that they have 112 genders to choose from and 200 plus sexualities. Now, just under a year ago, the new Minister of Education, Erica Stanford, was on Q&A with Jack Tame and was asked about this issue.
Given your commitment to a knowledge-based curriculum, should transgender issues be taught in our schools?
But what we've committed to under our agreement with the New Zealand First Party is to replace and remove and replace the RSE guidelines. And the reason that we're doing that is because we've had huge feedback, not only from parents, but a lot of principals who've actually sidled up to me and said, Erica, you need to get rid of it. It's problematic. Yep. And the reasons for that are because of the age appropriateness of some of the material and the fact that in those guidelines, it says things like, here's a way you can spread this right throughout the curriculum, which means that parents don't have the ability to say, actually, I think this is a responsibility for my family to teach, and I'm going to pull my child out of that lesson.
Because they can take them out of health lessons, right?
They absolutely can.
But you're suggesting that they're taught through all sorts of spaces.
The problem that we have with...
So in principle, though, back to my question, given your commitment to knowledge-based curriculum, in principle, do you think transgender issues should be taught in our schools?
It's not up to me to decide what goes in the curriculum. I'm not an expert. What we will do is get experts in to decide what is in and at what age is appropriate to teach them, because that's been the problem. It's the age appropriateness of when we introduce these topics.
You're mandating plenty of other things.
Well, the health curriculum is mandated, right? So the health and PE curriculum is mandated. What the problem, which I didn't get to before, is that this RSE guideline, and many people out there won't understand, it's not a curriculum. It's a guideline for boards.
It's a guideline and it's optional. For schools, it's for schools through their boards and optional for parents to pull their kids out.
It's been very confusing. Yeah. And so there are teachers out there and schools who are implementing it like a curriculum, hence why we have these problems. So the answer is to say, look, get rid of it. Take a look at the health and PE curriculum, which, by the way, is compulsory and I expect to be taught. And health and relationship and sexuality are so important to be in that curriculum. We have to get it right. We're not a set and forget government. We're listening to parents and we'll take another look. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. Yeah.
Huge feedback from both parents and principals saying that the RSE guidelines are problematic. She says it's age inappropriate, encourages the material to be spread through other subjects so that parents can't remove their children if they object. Now, of course, there's many other issues with it, including the biologically flawed gender ideology and the extreme sexuality messaging. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, just go to our link, sexeducation.nz, sexeducation.nz. But then we were told that it was gone, finito, no more. New Zealand First were celebrating. But we don't think all schools have paused the program. And the media and the activists are mad. They're on the warpath. Now, for example, let's watch TVNZ, you know, those drag queen promoters, TVNZ, and their coverage from just last week. And note who they rushed to for comment. Is it family first? Don't be silly. It's family planning, now deceptively named sexual well-being Aotearoa. Possibly because we'd all but destroyed the credibility and the name of family planning as an organisation. And remember, family planning or sexuality well-being, Aotearoa, wrote most of the extreme stuff along with Inside Out. So they have a vested financial and ideological interest in all of this.
Guidelines for relationship and sexuality lessons in schools have been removed by the Education Ministry after being labelled woke by New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters. The move is a coalition agreement promise, but without the guidance, there's concern from some that schools have been left to fill gaps themselves.
These guidelines helped this teacher create her lessons on relationships with information about what should be covered to support the curriculum. In a recent review, 85% of school leaders told the Education Review Office they were useful, but now they've been removed from the Education Ministry website because of a New Zealand First election promise to remove what Winston Peters called woke guidelines.
It does take away the support for any new teachers that are involved in the health education.
This is age-appropriate, evidence-informed best practice guidance, and it's really disappointing to see that it's disappeared before there's any new guidance issued.
She's calling for the ministry to provide more guidance to schools, with the new health and physical education curriculum not available until next year, and the current version from 2007 not specifically covering issues like cyberbullying, pornography and social media.
A lot of schools are just deciding to put a hold on teaching relationships and sexuality education at the moment because they just don't know what's going on.
Schools should continue to use the 2007 health and sexuality and relationship curriculum until the new one is delivered later this year.
The minister says the guidelines were confusing the issue.
They were not detailed, they were not year by year, and they were causing more confusion for schools.
But the Education Review Office said the guidelines provided more detail on what to cover at different years and how to teach it. And the optional use was the issue contributing to inconsistency among schools.
Yep. They never had the guts to ask the question, what is it about the current 2020 guidelines that has got so many parents and educators upset? And they'll never ask that question either, because they really don't want to know. Ironically, if they asked me onto a television program to discuss the issue and I actually disclosed what some of the material was, which you can see at sexeducation.nz, they would be subject to a Broadcasting Standards Authority complaint because of the offensiveness of the material. But it's not only TVNZ that are upset, and remember, they're really annoyed because it's New Zealand First, which is Winston Peters, and Winston Peters has declared a war on woke. And that's really upset them, which actually tells you everything. Now, here's stuff manifesting about it. Winston Peters' war on woke heads to the classroom as he's compared to Donald Trump. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters has claimed victory as sex education guidelines have been removed from the Ministry of Education's website. Peters was claiming victory on Thursday, so this is all happening last week, including that TV report you just saw. Peters was claiming victory on Thursday after the Ministry of Education pulled the guidelines about teaching for relationships and sexuality. During the 2023 election campaign, Peters claimed there was a gender ideology being taught to children. National then agreed to remove and replace the guidelines in its coalition agreement with New Zealand First. Labour leader Chris Hipkins said Peters' focus on diversity and relationships in education showed the New Zealand First leader was imitating Donald Trump. He said the government was putting children in danger by removing the guidelines. Yes, if you can't call someone a Nazi, the next best option is to use the words Donald and Trump. Good one, Hipkins. Bet you were really gutted when Phil Goff got sacked a couple of weeks ago. Probably wishes he was the one saying it. The article goes on, sexual health experts echoed Hipkins, that's family planning they're talking about, who of course are getting money for writing this junk. Sexual health experts echoed Hipkins' concerns that these changes, which they saw as political posturing, would have a real impact on young people. They said taking away guidelines without replacing them meant teachers were relying on out-of-date information from the early 2000s. Yeah, nothing worse than depending on parents, maybe. But we'll come back to that statement from our media reporter about the 2000s. But who did they run to for comment? Well, none other than our good friends at Family Planning. And then rabid left-wing site The Spinoff were also on the campaign trail. The Ministry of Education has removed relationship and sexuality teaching guidelines with no replacement in sight, a move that has been labelled a huge step backwards that sends a harmful message to queer teaching staff and students in Aotearoa. Oops, did they just say the quiet part out loud? You told us the curriculum was all about consent, digital technologies and relationships, but it's primarily about queer teaching staff and students. Yeah, we knew that. Anyway, goes on. The Relationships and Sexuality Education Guidelines were introduced in 2020 by then Associate Education Minister Tracy Martin of New Zealand First, when her party was in coalition with Labour. Building upon the Hauora model, looking holistically at physically, mentally, emotional and spiritual, the guidelines responded to emerging gaps in the curriculum around consent, digital technologies and relationships. Well, that's what they say, as well as to changing family structures, shifting social norms, they're shifting them all right, in relation to gender and sexuality and the increased use of digital communications and devices. You see how the truth is sort of massaged in amongst kind of these legitimate concerns around digital communications and devices. While some teachers were aware the RSE guidelines were to be removed this term, the lack of even a draft replacement has caused concern. School leaders were notified of the removal of the guidelines in an email on March 3rd from the Secretary for Education, which advised that RSE teaching should now align with the 2007 version of the curriculum. The email said there would be further updates and support as the refresh progressed, as well as the opportunity to provide feedback later this year. So, did you get the date? The announcement was March the 3rd, but the media campaign started their United campaign. It all started just last week, over a week later. And you know it's a campaign because a number of media outlets suddenly started talking about it. Now, you may be asking, why all the media interest all of a sudden? Well, New Zealand First were trolling the media. I mean, they'd already made this announcement last December, but they thought they'd wind up the media and activists again this week with this announcement. I mean, they've even included the One News logo there. And they say RSE removal, the guidelines should be gone from classrooms before the end of this term. The resource has now been removed from the Ministry of Education's website. Another step in the right direction. Now, the spin-off article, this one, spoke to a teacher who they wouldn't name, but who obviously was gutted by the removal of the curriculum. And then the spin-off ran to 3 groups to comment. Family first, I hear you ask? Don't be silly. Number 1 was University of Canterbury lecturer Tracy Cleland, who helped write the extreme 2020 RSE resources, so she would have been upset. Secondly, our good friends at Family Planning, now operating covertly under the contradictory term sexual wellbeing, Aotearoa, sounds very nice. And then thirdly, to the radicals at Inside Out. And what did they say? At this time where rainbow rights are under attack globally, it's more important than ever for rainbow young people to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. They are neglecting to do anything to support rainbow young people. Yep, that's what these guidelines are all about. Oh, and then they went to a 4th. They went to the Radical Mental Health Foundation of New Zealand, who reiterates, removing the guidelines sends a harmful message to rainbow staff and tauira that they don't deserve to be safe at school or work. Yep, that's a really balanced group of people to comment, 4 on one side, actually there was 5, if you include the anonymous teacher, 5, and none on the other to represent parents and families. Excellent journalism. Now, remember, the Ministry of Education said that we would be reverting back to the 2007 guidelines. But back in 2013, we asked US psychiatrist Dr. Miriam Grossman to review the sex education resources in New Zealand at that time, which were based on the 2007 curriculum that the Ministry of Education is now pointing schools to. And the review found that the resources are seriously flawed and that critical life and death information is distorted or ignored. Now, the report, R18, Sexuality Education in New Zealand, a critical review by US psychiatrist Dr. Grossman, This report was sent to all school principals and all Board of Trustees chairpersons of all the schools in New Zealand. Now, you may know the name Dr. Miriam Grossman. She spoke at our forum on the family back in 2012. But more recently, she was one of the voices of reason and common sense on the Daily Wire's documentary, What is a Woman? And the other important thing is that she is going to be speaking at our conference this year in August on her new book, Lost in Transnation, A Child Psychiatrist's Guide Out of the Madness. And I'll be interviewing her live from New York. Now, in this report, Dr. Grossman said that many of the sex education resources from 2013, but based on the 2007 curriculum, fail to tell the full facts and compromise the concerns and wishes of parents and the safety of young people. She said that the comprehensive sexuality education foisted on young people is more about sexual license rather than sexual health. Now, have a watch of the Family Matters that we put together at the time, and note, this is from 9 years ago, based on the 2007 curriculum, and take it easy on me, I'm 9 years younger. The report, R18, Sexuality Education in New Zealand, a critical review, is by US psychiatrist Dr. Miriam Grossman. Now, the report's been sent to all school principals and all Board of Trustees chairpersons of intermediate and secondary schools in New Zealand. And can I warn you that what we're about to discuss may not be appropriate for your children if they're watching this clip over your shoulder. Now, that's why the report is entitled R18. Yet, this is the info being targeted at your kids. Now, Dr. Grossman says that many of the sex education resources fail to tell the full facts and compromise the concerns and wishes of parents and the safety of young people. She says, a premise of modern sex education is that young people have the right to make their own decisions about sexual activity and no judging is allowed. Risky behaviours are normalised and even celebrated. Children and adolescents are introduced to sexual activities their parents would prefer they not even know about, let alone practice. It's reasonable to ask, is the comprehensive sexuality education foisted on young people about sexual health or sexual licence? Students are informed that at any age, sexual freedom is a right. The information is not accurate, comprehensive or up to date. Sex is seen as risky only when it's unprotected. The efficacy of condoms is overstated, in some cases vastly so. Young people are led to believe that sex is easily divorced from emotional attachment. And worst of all, critical life and death information is distorted or ignored. Students are left misinformed and with a false sense of security. Surely this is the last thing parents want. Yep, so remember that is commenting on the 2007 curriculum. Risky behaviours are normalised, even celebrated. Children and adolescents are introduced to sexual activities their parents would prefer they not even know about, let alone practice. Students informed that at any age sexual freedom is a right. Sex is seen as risky only when it's unprotected. Efficacy of condoms overstated. And critical life and death information is distorted or ignored. It sounds just like the current curriculum, doesn't it? Students are left misinformed and with a false sense of security. And parents should be concerned by both the report, this R18 report, which you can read on our website, and by what their children are being exposed to. Look, we're not naive here. Some youth are sexually active, although they are an increasing minority. The rates are dropping, but they're not being told the truth. The message seems to be that as long as you use a condom, you can pretty well do what you like in terms of promiscuity, experimentation, and fringe behaviours, with little or no information on the physical or emotional ramifications or prevention of disease. I mean, as a parent myself, I know we all dread the sex talk with our kids. We break out in a cold sweat just thinking about it. But we need to be the primary sex educators of our own children. Parents know their children the best and can determine the best timing and most appropriate way to tackle these sensitive topics based on the maturity and values of your family. Studies show that what happens at home is the greatest determinant of outcomes for a young person. Now, you can read this report on our website, Family First NZ, under research. The government shouldn't be going back to 2007. They should be starting from scratch. with parents being given a whole lot more say on what their children are being told and indoctrinated with. Your children deserve to know the facts of life, but with the emphasis on the word facts.